In 1 Kings chapter 18, we're picking up in the story, and here's the thing. Israel had a problem, right? We've been looking at this for several weeks, and we looked at it last week, that they're coming through this 3-year drought that they have been in, and it hasn't rained for 3 years, and there's no water, and they have a massive problem. But the problem is not the lack of water. And the problem is not with one person or another person, but the problem is with idolatry. They've ceased to worship the one true God in the way that he requires and deserves and is worthy of worship. And so in doing that, they've put themselves in a terrible position. And so it's relevant to us this morning, because you probably come in this morning and you probably, if you're looking at it, like, yeah, I got a problem too, right? And maybe the problem looks like there's not enough money. Or maybe the problem looks like I'm going to lose my job. Or the problem looks like, the problem could look like a lot of different things. But our hope this morning is to get to the heart of the problem. I mean, sometimes a problem is a problem, right? But sometimes there's a deeper root, and if we only ever treat the symptoms, if you went to a doctor and all they ever did was treat your symptoms and they never got down to the root cause, they wouldn't be a very good doctor, right? And this passage is addressing the deep cause. And so we saw last week that Elijah confronted Ahab to his face, and he said, hey, the problem isn't me, the problem isn't the lack of rain, the problem isn't that we need to go get more water, the problem is that you are serving other gods. And so as we come to this passage in 1 Kings chapter 18, we see it really clearly in the first couple of verses, right? And so Elijah said to King Ahab, who was the wicked king who had led Israel into idolatry, he said to him, hey, I want you to get all the people of Israel and all the prophets, and I want you to bring them to Mount Carmel to me. And they're headed for this big showdown. And so in verse 20 it says, so Ahab, the king, sent to all the people of Israel and gathered the prophets together at Mount Carmel. And Elijah came near to all the people, and he said, how long will you go limping between two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And the people did not answer him a word. Today we're just going to look at, there comes a time to choose, right? In life and in a lot of different things, there comes a moment where you just have to make a choice. And the nation of Israel had come to this point where God said, today is the day for you to choose. Yeah, I love you too much to let you keep going back and forth and just kind of spinning. Today is the day to choose. And I really believe that for some of us today is the day that God is calling us to choose. Are we going to continue to kind of go back and forth and waver and falter? Or are we going to make a choice to follow the Lord? And this is not just a message for those who have not yet put their faith in Jesus. So if you're preparing to check out and be like, okay, I get it. This is an evangelistic message. This is for people who don't know Jesus, and this is a message to come to Jesus. This is that, certainly. But it was far more than that, because the problem with Israel was not that they had completely just left God in the dust, right? They were still the nation of Israel. They were still the nation that they held on to their heritage and their tradition and their history about the God bringing them out of Egypt and the plagues and bringing them through the Red Sea. And he was the God that David worshiped that brought them victory over Goliath and brought them into the promised land. So they held on to all of that as part of their cherished tradition and their history. But in their practice, they said, hey, we're still God's people, but we're also going to worship Baal, because we've heard here that that's what we need to do to get crops, and we need to get fertility. And so they were not completely forgetting God. They were trying to do God plus other things. And in that sense, it's very relevant to a lot of our lives, right? That we were maybe raised in a Christian home, we were brought up with some sort of religious faith or belief or understanding, but we find ourselves at a place today where we're kind of caught between two different things. I want to please the world, but I want to please God. I take my value and my worth from other people's opinions of me, but I also see what the Bible has to say. And so we're kind of in this ping pong back and forth, and God loves us too much to leave us in that situation. What's the first and greatest command, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart and your mind and your soul and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. You begin with loving God wholeheartedly, and that puts you in a position to love everybody else. But if you don't begin there, you get pulled in 1,000 different directions. Listen to what he said when he brought Moses up on the mountain in Exodus chapter 20 to give him the 10 Commandments. Here's what he says. It says, and God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt and out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. Before I lay anything else down, before I lay out any other rules or regulations or this or that or whatever, I need you to know that you can have no other gods before me, that I must hold the throne of your life, the throne of your heart, that I must be above all other things. He says, you shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. Now, many of you have heard me talk about this before, that this was part of Oprah's AntiTestimony, right? She was in church and she heard this passage about God being a jealous God, and she was like, I can't serve a God who's jealous. That just doesn't seem right. And so she veered off and decided to create her own religion that didn't involve a jealous God. But here's the thing that she missed in that is that there's a difference between the creator and the creature, right? That for a created being, it is wrong for us to be jealous of other people's worship and attention and to want all the attention on us and want people to love us exclusively above all other things. But for the Creator God, it's the most perfect and right thing he could possibly do. And it's the most loving thing that he could do for us, to say to us, I require that you love me and put me above everything else. He does out of love. He does that because he loves us too much to let us follow after some lesser thing. It's kind of like if you have a loved one and you see them getting into a relationship with someone who is abusing them and is taking advantage of them and manipulating them. And right? And if you say to them, hey, listen, I don't want you in that relationship anymore. You're not doing it because you're trying to ruin their fun. You're not doing that because you don't care for them. It's actually your love that's driving you to say, listen, you need to cut that relationship off because that person is taking from you. They're using you. They're stripping you down to less than you could be. And that's what God says to us when we look to anything else. And so this morning, we all need to question, are we limping back and forth between two different things? Are we living for Jesus but also living for ourselves? Are we forgiven and redeemed as the Bible says we are? Or are we plagued by guilt and trying over and over again to redeem ourselves through our own actions, to become good enough, to become worthy of his love? Are we finding our hope and our purpose in God, or are we finding it in the world, in other things? Are we trying to please God, or are we trying to please others? If you're here and you're struggling today, which I think many of us are, right? Yeah, you have to ask yourself, what would it look like if I completely submitted to God in this area of my life? Because so many times we don't do that, right? We come in and we kind of kick the tires on Christianity and we say, yeah, I'll try and do that, God, but we don't really fully invest into it. And then we're like, yeah, I tried that Christian thing for a little while. It just didn't work. But the question is, have you really devoted yourself fully to it? Are you following with all of your heart? And hey, listen, it doesn't mean you don't have a job. It doesn't mean you don't have relationships. It doesn't mean you don't have things, right? We're not like talking about completely removing ourselves from the world. But A.W. Tozer talks about the blessedness of possessing nothing. Can you have things without possessing them? Can God put things into your hand and can he take them back out as he wills? And can you be okay with that and say, God, I know if you want to give me plenty, I can live with that and I can still love you. And if you want to give me little, I can accept that and I can still love you, that my possessions don't dictate my relationship with you, right? And that's what we're going to look at today. So it's really, it's a simple message, right? He says, hey, you got to choose. Are you going to serve God or are you going to serve Baal? And so I want to look at how this plays out, and then we're going to look at a couple observations from how this all unfolds. But really, the passage is the sermon. It preaches itself, right? So verse 22, it says, Then Elijah said to the people, I, even I only, am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Now we know that Obadiah told him last week that he had hidden 100 prophets of the Lord in a cave, and he was providing bread and water for him. So Elijah knows that he's not the only prophet of the Lord in name, but standing on that mountain, there was nobody else behind him, right? Nobody had his back. When he said, hey, are you going to serve God or are you going to serve Baal? Nobody said, we're going to serve God, right? Everybody was just silent. And he said, hey, look, there's 450 prophets of Baal here, and there's one of me. He said, let 2 bulls be given to us, and let them choose 1 bull for themselves and cut it in pieces and lay it on the wood, but put no fire to it. And I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood and put no fire to it. And you call upon the name of your God, and I will call upon the name of the Lord, and the God who answers by fire, he is God. All the people answered, it is well spoken. They found their voice all of a sudden, right? They're like, this sounds awesome. Let's check this out. That sounds good, right? Verse 25, then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose for yourselves 1 bull and prepare it first, for you are many. Call upon the name of your God, but put no fire to it. And they took the bull that was given to them, and they prepared it and called upon the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, O Baal, answer us. But there was no voice, and no one answered. And they limped around the altar that they had made. And at noon, Elijah mocked them, saying, cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is musing, or he's relieving himself, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is asleep and must be awakened. As a young, 20-year-old, I was much more sarcastic than I am now. And I loved this. This is like my favorite Bible story. I was like, godly sarcasm coming down, right? As I'm a little bit older than that now, I wonder if everything's okay with Elijah, right? He might have crossed the line, and it might be tied to the depression and things that he experiences down the road, but that's another sermon, right? They cried aloud and cut themselves after their custom with swords and lances until the blood gushed out upon them. And as midday passed, they raved on until the time of the offering of the oblation, but there was no voice, no one answered, no one paid attention. Then Elijah said to all the people, come near to me. And all the people came near to him. He repaired the altar of the Lord that had been thrown down. And Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord came, saying, Israel shall be your name. And with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he made a trench about the altar, as great as would contain 2 seahs of seed. And he put the wood in order, and cut the bull in pieces, and laid it on the wood. And he said, fill 4 jars with water, and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood. And he said, do it a second time. And they did it a second time. And he said, do it a third time. And they did it a third time. And the water ran around the altar and filled the trench also with water. And at the time of the offering of the oblation, Elijah the prophet came near and said, O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering, and the wood, and the stones, and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. And Elijah said to them, seize the prophets of Baal, and let not one of them escape. And they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and slaughtered them there. Man, it's a heavy passage, right? It's awesome. The power of God is on display. And there's 3 things that I want to look at here as we're thinking about God calling us to a day of decision. as God's calling us to say, hey, choose this day. Who are you going to serve? Are you going to serve your false gods or are you going to serve me? The first thing is the order in which things happened, right? Elijah let the prophets of Baal go first to demonstrate their utter futility. I don't know about you guys, but when we play board games in the Strickhouser house, there's always a lengthy debate about who gets to go first, right? whether the instructions say that, because why? Because if you go first, there's a better chance that you're going to win. That's typically how it always goes, right? And so that's why most games say the youngest goes first, right? Because they know that this fight is coming and they're just going to stack the deck in that favor. Or, if you play tic-tac-toe, right? If you put your X in the center square, you pretty much can't lose unless you're not paying attention, right? And so Elijah didn't want them to come back after this happened and say, oh, well, he kind of made it so that he was going to win. He set it up in his favor. Elijah said, no, hey, go at it. There's 450 of you. There's one of me. But you guys go first. You pick the bull that you want. You pick the location that you want to do it. But one thing, you can't light it on fire. You have to look to your God to do that. Now, Baal was the storm god, right? As we learned. So thunder and lightning should have been right in his wheelhouse. Like he even gave him a challenge that Baal should have been able to do. If Baal was truly the storm god, he could have easily sent a bolt of lightning from the heavens and lit the pyre on fire, but he didn't because he was no God. And Elijah knew that. He actually, he encouraged them towards the middle of the proceedings, right? So that he would make sure they were giving their full effort. He said, hey, maybe he's just deep in thought, or maybe he's going to the bathroom, or maybe he went out on a journey. I don't know. Maybe he's asleep. Maybe you just got to shout a little bit louder. And he wanted to make sure that they didn't say, oh, well, if we had tried a little bit harder. He had them exhaust their efforts. And there was nothing. It said, no, not a voice, not a sound. No one answered. Nothing happened. And then when Elijah went, he actually even dumped water on his offering. And that's kind of interesting, right? Because we know they were going through a 3-year drought. And so the Bible doesn't tell us where this water came from. And so there's a couple of possibilities. One is that they're near the ocean, and so maybe they sent some people down to the ocean with these jars to get the water, and so it would have taken a little bit of time for all of this to unfold. But the other possibility is that they had a little bit of water left that they had rationed up, and Elijah basically said, hey, you see what you got left? Bring it all. Don't depend on a false god, and don't depend on your own ability to provide for your needs. I'm going to show you that I'm greater than all of those things. And not to mention, in about an hour, you're not going to need those anymore because I'm about to make it rain, right? God knew what he was going to do. But the order is important. And sometimes this is what we need in order to turn to God. We need to just come to the end of our false gods. We need to see how far short they fall in order to be at a place where we're ready to receive the goodness that God has to offer to us. Has anybody had that experience, right? That's part of some of our testimonies, right? That they're like, hey, you know what? I tried to find happiness and joy and all these other things, and they just didn't satisfy. The job that I thought would make me happy, I get into it and I really don't like it that much. The person that I feel like I can't live without leaves me. We get what we always wanted, the new iPhone X. And yet I wake up the next morning and I don't feel like the hole in my soul has been filled, right? With like a rectangular device, right? Like all these false gods that come at us, they don't bring us satisfaction. Don't judge me when I show up here with an iPhone X, right? That's not the point of this story. But could you relate to that? What is competing in your heart with God? And have you found that it really just doesn't measure up? That it just falls short? You say, you know what, I thought I was going to find happiness there, and honestly, it's just not there. Maybe that has positioned you in a place where you're ready to fully devote yourself to the Lord today. The second thing is the effort, right? It's not the number of worshipers, the fervency of the worship, or the length of the prayers. The object of faith is far more important than the amount of faith or the religious display. These false gods, they always cost their worshipers dearly. These guys were cutting themselves with swords and lances. They were bleeding, and that's what false gods do to us, right? They drain us dry. They take from us. They don't give. God is life-giving. There's nothing that he's taking from you that you don't need, or that you need, that is necessary, right? If he takes something out of your life, it's because you're better off without it. But these false gods, they cost something. By contrast, the prayer of Elijah, these guys prayed from morning to lunchtime into the afternoon and nothing happened. And then Elijah comes with a really direct and simple prayer. It takes about 20 seconds to read his prayer, right? It's like, God, you're God. Show these people that you love them and that I'm doing this because you told me to, and show them that this is your will. In Matthew 6, Jesus gives us instruction on praying. He says, when you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogue and at the street corners, that they may be seen by others. And truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think that they will be heard for their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. If you think that the failures in your life are because you've lacked the right religious practice or form, perhaps it isn't the action, but the object that is faulty, right? Simple faith directed towards the true God will have incredible results in your life. Enormous amounts of fervency and dedication and faith in the wrong object will lead you nowhere, right? 450 times 0 is 0. But 1 times infinity is infinity, right? The one prophet praying a simple prayer to the infinite and ultimate God had vastly more power than the 450 prophets of Baal and all of their gymnastics and Cirque du Soleil worship that they were performing, right? The third thing I want us to see is that the total and utter completeness of this, right? The commitment to the Lord needed to be total and complete, and we see this in the execution of the prophets of Baal, and it's kind of shocking when we see this, right? They take them down to the brook and they slaughter all of them. And we have to understand the context here a little bit, that this is a theocracy. It's not a representative democracy like we have here in America with freedom of religion and freedom of speech and everything. This is God's people. He had set out rules and laws, and part of their laws were that anyone who leads others into false idolatrous worship, the penalty for that was death. And so there's a difference between operating within a theocracy. And so the solution for us today is not like, hey, let's round up all the idolaters and go kill them, right? That's not how it functions in our setting. But a greater parallel is to look at the person who struggles with addiction and says, hey, I just got to get this completely out of my life, right? They dump all the alcohol down the drain. They get rid of the drugs, and they delete people out of their Facebook and out of their phones, and they have to leave that crowd behind. The one who's dealing with lust and says, hey, I can't watch those even a rated R movie because the little bit that I see in there, it's just going to take me down a path I can't go. I've got to set a different set of parameters for myself because I can't just do it a little bit. If I'm going to get out, I got to get out. And we see the completeness also in the consumption of the fire, right? The fire not only burns the burnt offering, it burns the wood, it burns the stones, it burns the dust, it burns the water. Everything is gone. Because this altar was set up in a place that wasn't authorized for worship. Jerusalem at the temple is where worship was supposed to take place. They had set up this false altar up on this mountain, and God said, hey, I'm going to use this, but I'm also going to burn it down so that there's no temptation to say, hey, that's where the fire fell. Let's go back there and worship God there again. He said, no, you're coming all the way back to me. If you want to worship me, come to the temple in Jerusalem like I called you to do. Is there something for you today that you need to completely remove from your life? Is God laying it on your heart? That there is something that completely needs to go? And if there is, I would ask you the same question Elijah said. Hey, how long will you go limping between two opinions? Are you going to serve God or are you going to serve Baal? Here's the good news. I know this has been a heavy sermon, right? But the good news is the God we serve is the God who answers by fire. The God who is all-powerful. Nothing is impossible for him. It might feel like you're losing something to put all this aside and just pursue God, but I promise you that he's the only one that can fulfill and provide the things that you're looking for. He speaks to the church in Revelation, and I think that this is a word that fits here. In the church of Laodicea, we see the words of Jesus to this church, and here's what he says. He says, I know your works. You're neither cold nor hot. Would that you were either cold or hot. So because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. For you say, I am rich, I have prospered, I need nothing, not realizing that you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. I counsel you to buy from me gold refined by fire, so that you may be rich, and white garments, so that you may clothe yourself, and the shame of your nakedness may not be seen, and salve to anoint your eyes, so that you may see. Those whom I love, I reprove and discipline. So be zealous and repent. If you feel like God's correcting you, if you feel like you've been disciplined, he's doing it because he loves you. So be zealous and repent. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in to him and eat with him, and he with me. The one who conquers, I will grant him to sit with me on my throne, as I also conquered and sat down with my Father on his throne. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The encouragement comes from the fact that we serve an awesome God, that he says, not only will I forgive you, I will invite you up on the throne with me. I'm not going to hold you at a distance. I'm going to bring you near. And today is the day for that.